Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the global landscape, geopolitical landscape, and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Glad to be here as always.
Welcome. Several big topics again today, Irina, and the big one is Prime Minister Modi's visit to Poland and Ukraine very recently, just a few days back. And so let's understand a bit, how do you see this visit, the significance, the outcomes, the challenges, limitations, and opportunities from this visit?
Well, this was big in many ways. From an economic standpoint, Poland is a huge growing power in Europe. It's in one generation it basically caught up to Japan in terms of the size of its GDP, and it's projected to beat out leading economies such as Germany. Given the disparity at the rate of growth, Germany's economy has slowed down, Poland has gone up, it's becoming a critical defense partner. It might become one of the leaders of Europe within a generation. So, from the perspective of India's interests, it makes complete sense to start diversifying from relations with Western European countries and turn towards Eastern Europe, especially Poland, a major manufacturer, major IT counterpart, and I think the potential from a technology standpoint, for instance, for cooperation is tremendous, and of course, defense issues are also paramount. Poland's been one of the um, leading purchasing powers in Europe in terms of buying up some of the most advanced American equipment. I think there is going to be a very interesting partnership in the near future, and I think there's a lot of intriguing conversations to be had about the current security landscape, the issues of Russia's involvement in European affairs, its hybrid threats in that region, and the discussions I'm sure with India about logistics, about pathways for India to meet its economic needs without having to rely on Russia. Ukraine was an even bigger surprise for many. Uh, this was the first visit by an Indian prime minister to Ukraine, and I think in many ways it's both practical and symbolic. From a practical standpoint, India is known for having a I wouldn't say a neutral position, but rather being able to manage different countries at the same time, including different sides in various conflicts. Its independent foreign policy has worked out well for it so far. It has managed to um, meet its economic and security needs by uh, a diverse and sometimes conflicting array of relations. But at the same time, it's coming after. The prime minister's visit to Russia, which, as I mentioned previously, did not end particularly well. There was the visit to Ukraine is also showing India's growing importance to the Western bloc, but also the importance of the Western bloc to in meeting India's interest in modern technology, in the best on the market in terms of weapons and other supplies. There is an Indian business community actively involved in Ukraine as well. There are Indian students and others who work in Ukraine. So India has also had a relationship with Ukraine for a long time, despite not having high level meetings of that sort. And the result of this visit included four major signed agreements on future cooperation. There's also a lot in terms of security cooperation, because both countries have faced issues with separatism and foreign meddling. On the one hand, on the other hand, there are economic opportunities with grain deals in particular, but also energy, rare earths, minerals, and other natural resources. And of course, also Ukraine, like Poland, is known for many advanced IT professionals. Another potential area of cooperation with India is, of course, cybersecurity and technical innovation. And on the defense front, Ukraine has become one of those countries where innovation, became a testing ground for innovation of all sorts, especially weapons, something that India is for sure interested in. At the same time, there were also issues and limitations to the extent of that relationship. The visit was supposed to be focused on peace building, peace proposals. There are opportunities in terms of limited tactical involvement by India, such as negotiating prisoner of war exchanges, which some Ukrainian officials have proposed, and facilitating other deals of that sort. But neither country is currently committed to giving up their territorial claims in this conflict. So, in terms of a mega deal, I don't think mediation by any third party at the moment will bring about the desired result, simply because there are too many irreconcilable differences at the moment. On the other hand, there was also some dissatisfaction from the Ukrainian government over the extent of India's relationship with Russia, including in particular the the oil deals, which have fueled Russia's ability to sustain itself to some extent, as well as India's neutral position of abstaining from supporting anti-Russian resolution at the United Nations. Some of the pushback against these arguments included the fact that many of the European countries have also not fully divested themselves of the Russian oil, and so India should not be the only country blamed for this current scenario, especially since in more recent times its purchases of oil have fallen as it has turned to other sources, and also as Russia is not able to maintain the same level of prices as previously.
Right, Irina. So, this whole visit, who do you think was watching and how? What about Russia? How do you think it looked at this particular visit? And then we'll come to the other countries.
Although the Westerners tended to downplay the importance of this visit, explaining it away is purely pragmatic concerns, given the fact that India is already involved in both Quad on the one hand and BRICS on the other, and so its balancing of its relationships should come as no surprise. I think from Russian perspective, it's different. What to the to Americans and others may seem as a merely continuation of existing policies, for Russia, I think, is a step in a from Russia's perspective. India is moving in a more pro-Western direction by the virtue of simply making any step in that direction at all. Where previously there was none, now there is something. Even if for the Westerners it merely appears as basically neutralizing its position, that step on a scale for Russia is a step too far. Officially, it has not undertaken any positions because officially there was nothing objectionable about this visit. Peace building is something desirable. India has not engaged in any direct criticisms of Russia by name, merely criticizing the fact of the war. And pushing for a pro peace perspective, although many would interpret some of these comments as implicit criticisms of the Kremlin and its continuation of the conflict. But on a lower level, there's been some social media campaigns as basically attacking India as at what these trolling factories describe as a sort of a betrayal of the existing relationship, even though India has not formally agreed to only have relationships with Russia and its allies. There was never any sort of understanding. It's been a tradition for a long time, but never anything formalized. Therefore, India has no obligations to adhere to any particular position on any conflict involving Russia. It was the pragmatic consideration of its dependency on Russia's defense sector and logistical and economic concerns that drove this policy up until this point in more recent years, as opposed to the previous history where this alignment was more ideological. It would also be worth noting that as India becomes more developed economically and also becomes a bigger global player, it gravitates towards greater economies. Russia's economy is contracting on many levels. It still has been able to compensate for some of the war losses and sanctions through other areas. One of which has been India, and for Russia, of course, India's market is huge and vastly important. But from on the other side, Russia is going to diminish in its economic value to India as it grows closer to Western countries, as it's becoming a leader in the global South, and it's also expanding its relationships with the Middle East and African countries. So for Russia, Russia should be worried about a potential loss of India as its ally, as India is becoming less dependent, while Russia is becoming more dependent on this partnership.
Right, right. And what about the US? Means whatever its official position was immediately after this, uh, President Biden and Prime Minister Modi, they connected, and there was certainly this Ukraine talk. So do you think President Biden is hoping some sort of resolution to this war coming out from this part of the world?
I think any diplomatic movement on that front would be interpreted as a major foreign policy victory for the Biden administration, as they're looking to set up a foreign policy victory for a potential Harris administration. But I also think that the administration put a good deal of behind the scenes diplomatic work into making this visit happen in the current form that it has, and basically working towards um, facilitating a growth in relations between India and Ukraine, and thus strengthening the entire Western bloc in that way, kind of creating more of a bridge between the global South and the West in this manner. So I think even what already happened can be seen as a success just by virtue of it having happened with a lot of involvement in diplomatic facilitation by the US.
Right, right. And what about President Zelensky? How would he be looking at this visit? A personal victory for him that he has brought in a visit by Indian Prime Minister since his independence, and so how would he be looking at it? Anything substantial on the ground? Would he want India to play a much more active role to help this end this war?
I think without a question, the Ukraine views India as a credible mediator due to the history of its relationships with Russia, and also because India has the leverage to push Russia into concessions and an improved political position. Whether or not India will actually uh, decide to put that leverage to use depends a lot on the role of the West and Ukraine. I think the Prime Minister Modi is going to be very cautious in uh, in the way he conducts himself. I think he will want some substantial practical incentive from the United States and from Ukraine in moving forward with that kind of pressure. I'm not saying it's impossible for that to happen, but I think he will want more for practical diplomacy from the perspective of India's interest. It could mean many different things, but in terms of Ukraine specifically, it could mean, for instance, um, getting a preferential role in terms of investment opportunities, and reconstruction opportunities. For instance, displacing China as one of the countries being courted for that role already. Japan, Turkey, and many well-known American firms are slated to participate in that process, but China is one of the players looking to move in, and that I think is a concern to India from a geopolitical and economic perspective. I think if Ukraine opens up its doors to India and kind of uh, has less involvement from China, that could also weigh on the way that could play a role in the way India handles any sorts of broader negotiations. Um, in that sense.
Right, right. So that was the diplomacy part, Irina. What about things on the ground, on the Ukraine-Russia war front? On one front, on the Kursk front, Ukraine is having a lead. On the other fronts, Russian forces are making a lot of ground. So where does this lead to? More fighting, or is peace having changed? Some negotiation, you know, possible here.
I don't think territorial negotiations are going to be up in the air anytime soon. In fact, if anything else, Ukraine's very successful offensive in Russia has helped undo some of the optics that Ukraine's loss uh, of territory is inevitable, and that Ukraine cannot possibly get out of this conflict without giving up territory. It is Russia that appears to be surprisingly defenseless with regards to huge swaths of bordering lands, and I think the strategy is to force Russia to withdraw its forces from Ukraine because it cannot be effectively fighting on both fronts, and it will need to put to explain its willingness to let itself be occupied while it's fighting a fruitless quote unquote special operation that's going on into mm, uh, its third year now. Um, I think that time is going to further damage Russia in many ways. It has already run out of many of the essential supplies. It has been able to get around some of the sanctions on weapons and weapons parts by working with other countries and exploiting export import loopholes. But I think there's also a greater pressure by the West to crack down on some of these loopholes. So far, for instance, it does not look promising for Russia to be independent and making any significant gains. It's been making incremental gains in some less strategic areas in Ukraine, but whether the heavy human losses and equipment losses it's suffering are going to be worth the effort as Ukraine continues making gains in Russia itself remains to be seen, but probably not. Probably strategically it will have to reallocate its resources in a way that at the very least will not will cut its own losses.
Right, right, Irina. So let's move on from one war to another war in the Middle East, and that is about the Israel Hamas ceasefire talks that were expected. How do you think? Any hopes left for this ceasefire stuff?
The latest coming from the US is that there's progress on the talks, but there's still work to be done. That's a completely meaningless statement that we've been hearing for weeks on this specific proposal, and we've had many versions of this proposal that have at various times been sabotaged primarily by Hamas, placing additional conditions. The latest condition coming from Yahya Sinwar, the very man responsible for the October 7th attacks, who is now demanding a no-kill condition that would basically exempt him from being taken out by the Israeli military. Now, that condition isn't clear because in the event he means mm, the on being taken off the kill list for the duration of the ceasefire agreement. That means that nothing will stop him from killing off or hurting the hostages. Long term in the long term, if he means a permanent no-kill list removal that is completely unenforceable, which means that it gives Hamas an out never to release the hostages at all. Um, so there is really no solution so long as that condition is in place. So far, the IDF managed to rescue one Druze Israeli hostage today. The more hostages Israel manages to rescue on its own, the less leverage Hamas has. Um, Living hostages have now come down to approximately a little over 30 in number. This means that essentially Israel now has to make a strategic decision whether to continue focusing primarily on the release of the hostages, given the hundreds of soldiers that have also been killed in the process and the other fronts that Israel has been facing in this regional escalation, or whether it needs to focus primarily on eliminating Hamas and putting an end to that front through power moves. The stakes are already high. Hamas has made a unity government deal with Fatah, its rival in the West Bank. Iran continues supplying weapons to the West Bank, to the local Hamas presence. Hamas, for now, has been cut off from access to weapons, but if Hamas demands a met, Israel would have to withdraw from Rafah, returning Hamas to tunnels and its ability to procure weapons from the outside and attack Israel with rockets. So we are seeing a complicated scenario where the deal may not be all that likely from Israel's perspective and may not be all that desirable. The ceasefire agreement would not bring the war to an end, it would only be a pause to exchange the hostages for the Palestinian detainees and prisoners. But at the and it could give, if it's a 6 week long pause, it could give Hamas some breathing room to regroup and survive and come up with some solution, which is also not desirable from Israel's perspective. Um, the longer this war continues with or without pauses, the more Hamas propaganda outside has an impact on Israel negatively with the international public opinion. The more there is pressure, the less clear the victory becomes. And even now, many are complaining that it's not clear what's happening in Gaza and whether full liberation from Hamas is even possible.
Right, Irina. And what about Iran? Means it's keeping Israel waiting, or Israel is waiting, or it's not waiting for any retaliation from Iran's front. How do you
There
look
are
at
many
that? Should
theories
Israel
about it.
rest easy?
I think Israel is wise to remain on its toes, but I also think it was a little bit, a little bit naive to expect Iran to respond immediately to a surprise attack. I think it's natural for countries to regroup and try to figure out the best course of action, and it could take weeks, and Iran is known to be very patient. In fact, even Israel did not immediately enter Gaza after the October 7th attack. It took about 2.5 weeks for Israel to do so. So I think those who are rushing to judge Iran's failure to attack Israel at the moment as some sort of a major weakness, I think they are misjudging Iran's dedication to Israel's destruction. I think Iran is reluctant to enter a direct conflict with Israel due to inherent inferiority on many fronts. There's been talks that there could be a major cyber attack undermining Israeli capabilities. Some view that that could be a substitute for a kinetic attack. I believe that if that were to happen, it would actually pave the way for a military confrontation of some sort. I think Iran is highly likely to try to utilize its proxies. We saw a Hezbollah attack happen over last weekend, um, which included hundreds of rockets and would have included thousands of rockets aimed directly at Tel Aviv. had Israel not been able to disrupt it. This is exactly the sort of attack that could have been a very effective retaliation vowed by Hezbollah, and in some ways, Hezbollah may be relieved that the attack was preemptively thwarted with only symbolic destruction to its missile launch sites and various other targets, which left Hezbollah proper relatively unscathed and still able to take credit for attempting a very serious attack on Israel. So we are seeing all these things play out in a way that, on the one hand, limits the escalation and limits the damage to Iranian forces, but on the other hand, continues this sort of war of attrition, gives Iran and its proxies time to plan out their moves, and also they're watching for the U.S. election and the direction of U.S. elections, and they're trying to woo the incoming new administration, whichever is going to be, with seeming with dangling another potential diplomatic effort to return to JCPOA. So we are seeing this effort to try to force US to reconsider and to pressure Israel into not taking any offensive steps, and um, also pave ground for an attack by Iran, where US would pressure Israel to limit its response as well.
Right, Irina. And what about Qatar PM's his visit to Iran very recently? So how should we look at that? Any sort of a reconciliation here, or is it was it about something else? How do we link that with the Middle East crisis?
Sorry, I misheard the question. Could you repeat that? There was some
Yeah,
static.
yeah, yeah. The visit of Iran, Qatar Prime Minister
Ah,
to
sure, yes.
Iran. How should we look at? Do you think
So
they
the
will be able to tell Iran to play a much more neutral role rather than opening up another front? What do you think they talked here?
The official reason was to discuss the ceasefire deal and to figure out an approach to that, given that Iran is one of the main players behind Hamas, and so is Qatar as one of its founders. In reality, Qatar is in no position to tell Iran what to do. And in fact, I think Qatar very much prefers things as they are. It gets the attention from being the mediator, while also advancing its own strategic goals and perpetuating a state of conflict and pressuring Israel. So I think in that sense, Qatar is very much on the same side as Iran. I don't think Qatar would be pressuring Iran. I think more likely the conversations are entirely about how to cause as many problems to Israel as possible, while also not limiting any political criticism of Qatar in that situation. Possibly they'd be discussing funding options, possibly they'd be discussing any future attacks. I don't expect this to be a simple, friendly diplomatic meeting. I think it's highly concerning and damaging. I think Qatar and Iran are probably not happy with Israel's successful elimination of top level commanders, tunnels, its ability to limit Hamas from causing damage, additional damage from Gaza. But on the other hand, the war has lasted a very significant amount of time. Hamas has still not been fully vanquished. It has been able to recruit more ideological followers, even if its weapons are in short supply. And so far, Israel has not had a decisive victory against any of Iran's proxies on any front, and ideologically too has been struggling to tell its story beyond some very friendly fronts, such as in the United States.
Right, Irina, right. So let's move on from two different wars to a war of another kind, the chip wars between China and US, and there are several players here involved. Jake Sullivan, US National Security Advisor, he is in China to stabilize US China ties amidst all these chip war tensions. So help us understand what is this chip war all about and how does this visit actually Because China themselves not expecting much, as some of these statements I could understand.
Well, the AI chips have become the new front in global great power competition and global confrontations. They used in the most advanced technologies, ranging from military, from to supercomputers, to assorted green energy technologies. And so far, U.S. has been leading uh, in on the development of the most advanced AI chips, but China has been pouring resources into trying to catch up. And it has been making advances in homegrown industries when it comes to mid-range chips, not the most advanced, but mid-range chips, which affect a wide variety of products and technologies. It has also been trying to work with countries to overcome export limitations and bans by U.S., Japan, Taiwan, and Netherlands. China's had a significant dependence on Taiwan, and it still is doing some business. But China has responded to these export limitations by exploiting loopholes through third countries, exploiting weak export import control enforcement, and additionally putting bans and limits on particular elements and minerals and metals that are used in the creation of these chips and other technologies. And right before Jake Sullivan's visit, China announced additional bans on some of these components that are crucial to the industry and that China essentially has monopolized. US has been able to stockpile on some of these elements, but not on all of them. And so we are seeing this tit for tat tension. U.S. exports puts bans on the technologies it has developed, but China is trying to cut off U.S. from having access to the critical components and elements that only China has in store.
Right, right. And a lot of these, either these chip wars or the ground wars in Ukraine as the Middle East, a lot of this is depending on the you know outcome of the U.S. elections. And in that context, the DNC, Democratic National Convention, was a big affair. How should we make out this particular thing about the RFK Jr.? He drops out of the race as independent. How do we look at it? How is it going to increase Trump's chances, or Kamala Harris will continue to be a strong contender?
I think Harris has several advantages at this point. One of which is that her party is unified behind her 100%. Um, she has even been able to recruit some renegade Republicans who are not happy with Trump and his dominance of the party to her fold. She's also been making gains in states that have traditionally been hard Republican, and in some cases even went for Trump in the past. Uh, North Carolina, which has always been a Republican state, is at play. She's been making unprecedented gains in Texas, at least according to the reports. I still don't think Texas will ultimately go to the Democrats, but it's becoming uncomfortably close, and is impacting the down ticket races as well, reportedly. And she's been able to project, a more upbeat vision as opposed to Trump's very dark and pessimistic rhetoric about the future of the US and polarizing commentary about his opponents. Trump is still struggling with refocusing on the Harris president candidacy as opposed to on Joe Biden and his mental state. He is now being positioned as the low energy candidate as he once called Joe Biden, because Harris is younger. She is doing more events and she appears to be quite energetic at them. Moreover, the Democratic platform has been significantly, at least on the surface, appears to be more hostile to some of the adversarial entities such as North Korea, Iran, Russia, and China, whereas Trump has been praising the dictators of many of these countries. Harris is also trying to position herself as the more traditional American and unifying candidate by calling her position freedom versus chaos. Chaos being, of course, the Republican Party under Trump. On the other hand, her economic positions have brought in a lot of criticism, even from among supporters, such as the traditionally Democrat-leaning media, such as the New York Times and CNN. Her her policies regarding taxes and so forth are being seen, and against price gouging, which could bankrupt middle class and smaller businesses. Um, all of these are seen as highly negative. Trump's 100% tariff on all import goods is also being criticized for being protectionist and basically creating raising inflation and raising prices. So, from an economic standpoint, both of the candidates are turning away from the traditional, fairly liberal positions on trade and on economy, and towards increased government interference and regulation and so forth. And I think there's going to be a lot of people on both sides who are very concerned about all of that.
Right, Irina. And now, as the last topic of the day, from all these fights, let's all move on to this bizarre e-fight between South Africa and Nigeria, leading to a lot of difficulties for Uber and Bolt drivers. Miss, what should we understand? Why are they fighting, and why is this e-fight happening? The good thing is it's e-fight, but it's impacting a lot of, day-to-day living of a lot of drivers in both these countries.
So the bizarre thing about this, well, first of all, there's been some political tensions between the two countries. Nigeria is traditionally pro-Western. South Africa is much closer aligned with Russia, Iran, and China at the moment. So there's been undergoing tensions. Nigeria is a growing power and a powerhouse of the West, and also one, but experiencing divisions in economic and political issues. South Africa has also been a major economy, a growing defense industry. Um, so there's been some economic rivalry, some political tensions between them, but this particular incident was actually started as a joke, uh, criticizing basically the other country. There was a series of basically pranks played by the internet activists, and this joke got out of control. Essentially, a lot of the people on the other side in Nigeria did not uh, understand that it was in fact a joke. It was taken seriously, led to retaliation, and before we know it, we see Bolt services, and that's a ride-sharing app popular in that part of the world, being banned, and the conflicts becoming more and more elevated. So it's really a bizarre story how a prank, not even a piece of disinformation, led to an economic problem between the two countries.
Indeed, a very bizarre state of affairs, at least in this part. And I'm sure people will spare at least the people who are not part of all these games. At least things will come back and be back to normal soon. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the World According to Irina Shukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. We'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much.